be present.
Yes.
Okay. Welcome to this session. It's the last of our first day of our Wood Life Sweden in Turkey symposium. It's been an intense and very interesting day so far, and we will continue with a fantastic presentation of Wingårdhs architects. My name is Tove Duman-Wallsten. I work for Architect Sweden. We're a professional organization for architects, interior architects, landscape architects, and spatial planners with more than 14,000 members in Sweden. And our role today has been to work with the program for the symposium together with the Circle, Ece Çakireidan, Feyza Baltaci, and Nurullah Kaya. And now we are very happy to introduce the keynote speakers from Sweden, Wingårdhs architects. Gert Wingårdh, you are the founder of the architecture firm, and since the end of the 1970s, you ran one of the most interesting offices of architecture in Sweden, and you also had one of five Kasper Salin Prize, which is the highest award you can get in Sweden as an architect. And Joakim Lyth, you're a partner of Wingårdhs since quite some years, and you're head of the Malmö office of Wingårdhs. You and the different teams at the Wingårdhs offices have produced many icon buildings of Swedish architecture. And today you will present some of these. 4 of them are part of the Wood Life Sweden exhibition. I think we will hear about some of them, but also some of your earlier work. There's been precursors for many Swedish architecture projects, especially in wood building. And also, if I've heard it right, you will present some of the recent and current work that you are doing. I'm very happy to give the 2 of you the word. The screen is yours.
Thank you very much for the floor. And so I'll just go through some of the facts about our firm. So you see the very exotic name. It means vineyard in Swedish. And if you have the first slide, second slide. Joakim, are you going to change the slide?
Yes, like this.
That's brilliant.
You check. Could you change it?
Change it?
Yep, wrong screen now.
Okay. Sorry, I will try again. Let's see.
Sure. Thanks, now through.
Fantastic.
Does it work? Yeah.
And then it says something, and
Let's see what happened. Did we lose yet?
Gert, we cannot hear you.
Let's see if he comes back. Let's see, Tove, are you there? Let's see what happened. Did we lose Gert there?
Gert is not with us for the moment. I'm here, and we can wait for him to connect. Or if you want to start just talking about.
Yes, I can start, of course.
We have some people checking in a bit late for the symposium as well, so I can just reintroduce. We are going to listen to the Swedish keynote speakers from the Swedish office Wingårdhs, which is one of the icon offices and icon architects of Sweden today. They are precursors for many of the wood architecture buildings and have been one of the first agencies to pronounce that in order to build sustainably, they will only build in wood, or when it's possible, they will choose wood as a material for the main part of their projects. And they will present some of the projects that are part of Wood Life Sweden. They've got more than 4 projects in the exhibition, and also some earlier work, precursors for Swedish architecture today, and also some of their work that are on the drawing table for the moment. Just waiting for Gert to reconnect, and then we'll continue the presentation. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, let's see. They're trying to reconnect. Gert is in Stockholm today, and I am in Malmö, so we are quite a few kilometers away from each other. But I can start shortly to tell something about our office. Our office was started by Gert.
Sorry, could I add more? Is that true page now, or could I check?
Okay, let's see.
Got it.
If you need, I can check the slides from here.
Okay, yeah, maybe it's better if you do it.
So now I'm back in business, or?
Yeah,
Yes.
welcome back.
Well, thank you very much. And you are shifting. We'll not do this so long, but we are about 200 people, and we're fairly equally female and male. The average year age is 39, and we're, as most offices now, from quite a lot of different countries. There is at least 2 people from Turkey working in our office, and we've done some work in Turkey. We are in the second city by size in Sweden, Gothenburg, which is the main office. And we are in the south, and we are in Stockholm, which is the capital of Sweden. Out of the 190 co-workers, about half are architects. Some are building engineers, and we'll click some more. And you see we have some model makers. We have people working just with visualizations, graphic design. We have writers, and we have the IT staff. And it was all started back in '77, as Tove sort of mentioned. Could we, next slide, please? Next slide. Yeah. And so this is what we always sort of remember is that it's last year, 2020, it was 36 billion tons of CO2 equivalent that came out into the world. And the red circle is China, which is the worst emitter. And if we take Sweden, we are about 49,000 million tons of CO2. Pretty bad, not so bad as everybody, but still something to work with. And if we see what the buildings that we are on our drawing boards, it is about 32,000 tons of CO2. And we've just, that tiny slice that we've drawn out there is what we are in the office doing when we travel, when we eat, when we live our lives, so to speak. It's about 300 tons of CO2. And the bigger part of the 36,000 tons is what we construct, what we design. And here's the next slide. At least 1/3 of that could have stayed if we did our buildings in wood. If we take next slide, it could be as much as 50% of all that impact on the atmosphere of the earth that could have been reduced by using wood for all the parts that we think it is possible. And so that's our main contribution to what we do today. So we have taken up this policy that we propose to all our clients that can we do the building in wood instead? And of course, we do have clients who say that we want a concrete building, and then we design it and are happy about that. But to every client, we propose the possibility of doing it in wood. And we've been working like this since, that's been our policy. And we do it in balloon frames up to a story of 4 stories, something like that. And we do it cross-laminated timber up to about maybe 20 stories, something like that. We've done it actually, and this is the first project for 9 stores for like 10 years ago. And we'll go through the slides fairly quickly, and this is out of one of our books. It's the first cross-laminated timber construction we did. It's in the city of Stockholm, and it's highly insulated since we have the cold winters in Sweden, as I believe you have in Turkey. Next slide. And it's all clad in cedar shingle, very simple plans. Next slide. And the cedar shingle and the walls, they are prefabricated, and we're using the single slate of the single shingle to cover up all the joints between the prefabricated unit. And so this was like our first project that sort of proved the concept. And this is just to show that the cross-laminated timber, there is still some adhesives, some cement into it, about 1%. And next slide is about a project we call it Kihlström Sky. And this is a project that Joakim has been highly involved in. We tried to use how many hours of effort we put into our projects. You can see that on the team schedule there. At least 317, close to 400 hours you put into when we did this. What do you think about our Kihlström Sky project, Joakim?
Yeah, we are very proud of it. It's in the city in the southeast of Sweden called Karlskrona, and Karlskrona is a World Heritage Site. It is a naval city created by the Swedish king in the early 18th century. And the thing is, to be able to build within the World Heritage, you have to be really sensitive. So we actually started out by actually mapping out all the historical buildings that are part of the World Heritage. Next slide. And so our aim was actually to produce a building, to design a building that would fit into the World Heritage, but also leave traces of its own time. So to the left, you can see our profile of the building, and then you have the famous churches and naval buildings to the right.
So we want to do something that is in the scale of the existing still, but still proudly of our times.
Yeah. So basically, this is our latest effort in a CLT housing, and it's all wood. We decided to make the lift and staircases in wood as well, instead of stabilizing concrete shafts. So that means that we have to put in real effort. And the big task when you design a big wooden house like this is 3. It's moisture, and it's the acoustics, and it's fire. So basically here you see how the building was constructed of different prefabricated panels. You also see the gray boxes on some of the pictures. There are the prefabricated bathrooms, where we try to include as many of the installations as possible. Next slide. So this is just a picture, a rendering of the not finished buildings, and then you have the silhouettes of Karlskrona to the right. Next slide. And this is also a rendering from the sound where it's situated. Next slide. And there you see the plan. Basically, it's 3 buildings, one big building and 2 small buildings, and they are forming a patio that is put on top of a parking garage. So it's like a raised floor that is private. But we also try to keep the quay, like keep the public promenade and the quay open to the people of Karlskrona. And that meant actually creating like a restaurant also. So the lower level that is closer to the sea is public, but the courtyard above is private. You see it on the section.
Yeah, I will just say that the sea level is rising in Sweden, of course, as in all of the world, but Sweden was depressed during the last glacial times, which means that it raises still at a rate that is about equal with the sea level rise. Still, we are not allowed to construct building closer to the mean water tablet than 2.8 meters. So that can differ slightly in different parts of Sweden if it's a narrow strait or something like that. In this case, all the foundation work on the lower level is executed in concrete, and on top of the lower level, the building is all wooden frame.
Yeah, and this is a section showing we choose these inclined walls both to send a hint to the World Heritage of Karlskrona and the really strong silhouettes of the big buildings, but also to actually show down, send down light and air into the courtyards and to in the surrounding spaces around the buildings. Next slide. And this shows the interior of the building, and basically one of the ways to solve the problem with fire and with the acoustics is actually to have like a raised floor, like an installation floor. And together with this compact prefabricated toilets and bathrooms, we actually managed to use this area in between the two layers of the floor to take all the installations there, all the HVAC and plumbing goes there. Next slide.
No, we could basically go back one slide. I think just if we go back one more slide. If you go back one more slide, then you can see the toilet box, how that is close to the number 3. You will see how that can fit onto the load carrying CL floor slab. And then you see the raised floor. And you will see that all the cavities is filled with insulation in order to take care of the soundproof in between. And that's all dry executed. And as we will show now in the next 2 slides, Joakim, we have all the installations on top of that, which is excellent working conditions for the people working with the electrical conduit and with the HVAC.
Yeah, that's also one of the interesting things when you build in massive wood like this is that the tolerances is basically less than 1 millimeter. It's so exact and so precise, so you don't need to have those usual tolerances like when you build with concrete. Next slide. So here we see a picture where we actually see how electricity, plumbing, HVAC and water is put horizontally, not vertically, only horizontally within the raised floor.
And the raisers are combined with the staircase. So there's a square space and a circular staircase, and the space in between is where all the raisers for electrical and the water and so forth is taken care of. Yeah. Very easily accessible for maintenance. And this is basically the unit for the air handling. Please.
Yeah, next slide.
Yeah. And there is a lot of the gypsum board that takes care of the fire business. And then you had the balconies, how they are.
Yeah, so this is actually a photo of this is not rendering, it's a photo of the finished building. And here in the front, in the podium, fronting the garage behind it is actually the public restaurant that actually helps to create the public quay around the building.
And the building is executed in cedar shingle, which are stained with fireproofing and color, thus having these 3 colors, the black and the gray white and the red one. And that is remembering of how lighthouses and navigation caskets are executed in the maritime area of this naval harbor city. There you can see clearly the shingle style of it. And the red, which is very typical for Sweden.
Yeah. Okay, and the next project is called Fulton. Yeah, and this is part of an urban development that we are doing currently in Malmö. It was part of the competition that we won 4 years ago, and now we have finalized the zoning plan together with the city of Malmö, and we have actually started with the first building. This was a try-out project for us when we tried to adopt as many levels and questions about sustainability as possible, both ecological, technical, and social sustainability. So the first building out here now is Fulton, the lighthouse to the right, and this is a plot, one of the plots in the part of Malmö called Hyllie that is still left and undeveloped. Just to the south, you see the rail tracks that actually takes people from Skåne and from Malmö and from Sweden over to Copenhagen and the airport of Kastrup. So it's a very it's a very central location, and the first building in this plan of 7 is Fulton. It's a 14-story high office building, and it's supposed to be constructed of CLT and glulam timber. Next slide.
And a bit of glass.
And a bit of glass. Yeah. So the idea here is to, this is just the zoning plan. You can skip next. You can see here that the brown buildings are commercial and office buildings. The yellow buildings are housing, and the beige building is a production facility. So it's supposed that this quarter with 7 houses will actually consist of many functions. It's a function integrated quarter. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the roof of Fulton with some tree and a small park, and then we go down. So basically, it's a stepping wooden building that is covered with a glass facade, and in between the extra skin glass facade and the wooden building, there will be green terraces. Yeah, so this shows the main structure of the building. And
the grid is 4.8 meters, which is what we can carry with the CLT without any strengthening. So it comes directly out of the mill.
Yeah, you could say that the span here for the CLT and for the glulam is actually optimized so to reduce the sizes of beams and slabs, and thus to create lesser impact. So this is basically what you see from the ground, and the overhang creates this public waiting area for the trains. On the first 2 floors, we have a public library and also have functions like a bakery that will keep people working there all during day and night, and thus keeping eyes on the public space in front of it, so to eliminate and lower crime and insecurity and so on. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this just shows some details. So even the structure for the external glass skin will be made out of glulam timber.
And this is very much executed in the same as the housing project, with a raised floor for different types of installations, AVC and electric conduit.
Yeah.
And then you have the insulation, which is, I mean, taken for granted that we have, because we do have a cold climate in the winter with below 0 degrees, down to 20 degrees below zero.
Next slide, moving on. Yeah, just a typical floor plan. There's also an idea of actually sharing here, that the inhabitants and the workers in this house should share as much as possible. So the different office areas, they don't have their own kitchen, they don't have their own toilet. So everything is shared to an as big extent as possible. Next.
This is basically the core, not the entire floor plate, but the core.
Mm. Yeah, so that was what the floors would look like. And the thing is, I mean, if there is something with this project that you didn't really succeed in, it's actually, we would like actually to have kept as much of the installations as possible in the floor, in the possible floor area. But as you see here, to make an HVAC engineer to put his air ducts in the floor instead of in the ceiling was too much of an effort, really. So even though you try to innovate using wood, I mean, to get everyone in the project to understand it and to fully enhance it is not an easy task. So you have to take it step by step. So if we could get like 50% of the installations down in the floor area, we are happy with that. But for the next project, we will aim for higher percentage. Yeah. Next slide, the installations in the ceiling. Yeah, and this shows a picture of the external courtyard, like all those courtyard spaces that will be created around the building. And that will be part of the tenants' gross floor area.
And this will be very likable in the springs and the falls. Not so much in the winter, but it extends the usable floor space for meetings.
Yeah. So what we have actually turned up now is that usually in Sweden you have triple glazing in an external curtain wall, but here we have 2+2 sheets of glazing. So these external facades actually have a double glazing, and that means that the temperature on the inside will be much more easier to control, even though it will be a little bit colder in the winter. Next.
And that's facing south, and that's facing east, where the heat load builds up on the biggest part of the building. We have a very low set sun in the winter time.
Next slide. Yeah, so this just shows the floor plans when you move around and you see the core. Next slide. Yeah. Yeah, and it just shows how you can differentiate and with lots of tenants, one tenant per floor, but also multi-tenants. Next, yeah, and the in-between space. Next slide. And the first floor, which will actually work as a living room for the people in this area of Malmö. So the municipality of Malmö will actually rent the 2 first floor for like public information and library and the kids area and so on. Next slide.
And this is basically the first station that you meet when you come into Swedish soil. And one of the main gateways to Scandinavia is the Copenhagen Airport. It's very much like the Istanbul airport, the gateway to Turkey. So taking the train, leaving the train, this will be basically the first building that you will see. And this is also about circulation. It's just shelters in the northern city of Umeå, where you have the buses coming in, about 10 buses at the same time, and they interchange the passengers. And in order to give them some shelter against snow or rain, we have this wooden construction. Basically, it's very simple. It's just information and it's just shelter. And the high shelter allows for the buses to come in under it, and the lower shelter can house a second layer of protection for the people. Next slide. It's very self-explanatory. Next slide. And this has been in place, I think, like 4 years now. Next slide. And this is, of course, a bit symbolistic. That's just how the plan works with some pillars. Next slide. It's right in the middle of the wooden district of Sweden, deep forests of the far north. Next slide. Next slide. And there's just some signage, but it's very much about the forces, what carries what. Next slide. And next slide. And what I think is nice about the wood is that it's very easy to carve into. You can put your own hearts, love, your own names. You can do your own graffiti onto it. It's a very soft and workable material. Next slide. And now we're working with a major building in one of the provincial towns. All the elevations are out of recycled material, and thus the differences between them. The recycled brick, the recycled things around windows, this recycled jetties, it's a harbor area, and it's also recycled ductworks. Next slide. And the interior of this structure, which is a 1 billion budget structure, that's where the site is. Next slide. Is next slide, I think, too. It's a multi-use function, so you have the authorities on top. You have what we call a cultural school. You have theaters, and you will have a library on the lower level. And next slide. It's all executed in wood, and the wooden treatment is very much a part of the feel of the building. And I think there is a tendency, there is a certain acquaintances that people feel comfortable with wood in the northern countries. I think a lot of the families sort of genetically races back to what is the construction core of Sweden, Scandinavia. It's the wood, the wood turns yellowish over time. So the only treatment that we give wood is usually to just have it a slight tint of white in order to make it not so yellowish in the end. Next slide. And that's the all wooden structure. It's a bigger framework. We have this lighthouse at 4.8. This start at close to 17 by 17 meters. And then you have the glulam beams on 2.4 meters. And you have the CL slabs onto those slabs. And then as the weight of the building increases, going down lower, you will increase the tightness of the pillars in order that you do have 4.8 structure, creating a stiff grid, and then you have the 12 meters between those. And then you have the parts that are jutting out, which is still just on the 17-meter grid. And so from construction to construction, we try to optimize the way we use wood, so it will get to be less and less weighty buildings. And now those projects that you see now, and saw now, what was basically those projects that we are working with at the time, which are on the drawing boards and can be shown. And this is some historical looking back. This building is more than 20 years old. And at the time it was constructed, it was perhaps the biggest wooden building made out in public space in Sweden. It was conceived as a barn, and it's a science center in Gothenburg, my hometown. Next slide. That's the Gothenburg city, and when you have the hairpin, is the situation of the building. That is the competition site, and the project could be expanded 100% on the site. Thus, it was put in one on the corner. It was subdivided into 5 pieces, where the 2 left pieces, the wooden ship, and the next piece, which is the rainforest, are executed in wood. Then you have a stone chest with a lot of aquariums and so forth. And you have a canopy, which is also constructed out of wood, insulated with cork. And then we have some incline hoists. And basically, that's a sketch. If you take the next picture. Next slide. That's how the building looks executed. All glazed towards the north, but there is very little heat exposure to the glass. Next slide. That's acting as a shop. It's basically cured on these pillars. And there is a framework around it with glow lab, 17 meters clear span, a spruce floor on top of that. And that is a modern barn to be rearranged with different exhibitions and so forth. You have just the wooden floor, which you can drill into, and you can see the round sort of protecting the floor. There was once a penetration, but anybody can service the building easily. And I think that it's one of the great advantages of working wood. I mean, if you work with a concrete building, people are not used to putting nails into it. They're not used to use a drill in order to take a hole between 2 ceilings. And since this is an exhibition building, it will be rebuilt, rearranged all the time, over and over again. And this building has been now for working 20 years, and it has about 12 million visitors. And it's proven the concept as a worthwhile one. Next slide. And then we stack these floors on top of each other, and we had some cross bracing. And next slide. Next slide. And we have some escape routes onto the courtyard, to the mountain. This is how, on top of it, there is like a canopy of light coming into the building, but also as leaves on a tree, we reach out in order to gain solar energy into the building. So it's all designed from the side, from the lines on the side, and from the optimum angles of the solar energy coming into the building. And from that wooden trusses is suspended what could be like a glass cage over a different biosphere, which is a rainforest. Next slide. And all the circulation system is subdivided in 3 different slots, so we can rearrange and have rearranged the staircases and the access many times over the building's 20 years life. And the main core is, of course, children who are to learn about nature, about science, about technology in the building, and doing that on biological systems. Next slide. Next slide. And next slide, this is one of the restaurants. This is basically the canopy, the aquarium covering the rainforest, which is a very, very fierce environment for wooden structure. Next. Some pictures of that. The rainforest suspended from the wooden trusses. Next slide. Next slide. It's all day-lit construction, and all the windows are covered with frosted glass in order to reduce the heat load. And then there is a water spray on top of the glass, which reduces the water temperature. It's ancient cooling techniques. And that's also been working without any fan use now for a period of 20 years. Next slide. Somehow we like to detail buildings. And this is show how everything can expand and does expand. Next slide. Next slide. This is the building seen from the top, where you can see the solar heat gaining roof, which like leaves turns into the sun. And that works with a very little heat loss, even in the winter time. As you can see, there's some snow on the ground. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. It's a fairly complex programming, and you will have some bioenvironments for children to understand how crowds are moving, how plants are growing, how hydraulics are working, and so forth. Next slide. Next slide. We will just go through some pictures of the sort of environment which is in this wooden building. Next slide. Next, next, next. I think we'll quickly go through these. And these are taken some 10 years into the building's working life. Next slide. Next slide. And you can see the wooden construction. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Just go from. And this is how the barn works with different exhibitions. And it's been rearranged and rearranged. And the power to rearrange comes a bit from it being wooden in so many parts. So easy to put your hands on. Next slide. Next slide. And now we've added a 5th element to this. 2021 is construction right now. And that is a planetarium and some new hoist and some new exhibition space. And since this building was conceived as a collage of different parts, you had a wooden ship on the left, you have the rainforest in the right, middle right, and you have the aquariums under water surface made of stone, and you have the open shed insulating carpet. This is an all wooden construction with some additions in cedar shingles. Next slide. This is how that part will look, how that adds with the sort of Buckminster Fuller dome on top of it, all wooden construction too. Next slide. Quite different, lot of shapes, but trying to do a lightweight structure out of wood. Next slide. Next slide. All that is basically constructed out of wooden members. Next slide. This is how that works and sits on top of it, all covered in cedar. And this is a sort of planetarium in order to explore both the molecules, the atom level, and the tiniest of objects, and the space and the biggest. And that's part of a big education effort in Sweden, which now involves the construction of 4 different domes of this size in different parts of Sweden. And this is new exhibition space between the hoist and the dome. Next slide. Just to show that we've been working a bit outside of Sweden too, in Finland, which is very much the same feeling. And this is a very strong lake where we wanted to do a building where there's this sort of lattice of wooden poles to give shade to the glass facade, which also a bit is like a fin of a fish. Next slide. This is the site onto the water. This is a very small pavilion, just a cafe. Next slide. And you can see some of the shades of the fin, giving some sort of filigrane like the leaves of trees. And you can also see that there is some perforated plywood giving some shimmering light onto the beams. Next slide. Simple program. You're coming in, you have the restrooms, you have some cloakrooms, you have some storage space, and then you have the open serving of food, and then you have inside space, possibility to open them up as a veranda, and you have the big outdoor space, the balcony just sitting on the water. And also, as you can see, a very clear construction system of glulam beams. Next slide. And the feeling underneath these slightly curved beams and the fins protruding. Next slide. And the construction photo. And inside, how you get some of the wood mesh and the different shades coming onto the floor and taking out some of the daylight. Next slide. This is Lyth in Finland, which is the center for a lot of the furniture making. So that's the door handle of the building, made out of plywood. And the next slide is that we tried to issue in 2007 a science center in Germany, in the eastern part of Germany. We had some issues with the Scandinavian. If we go back one slide, if we have some issues with maintenance of wood, and we said that if we try to charcoal the wood, then it would be maintenance free. So basically, every single part of it that's visible and open to the weather is charcoaled by fire. And the building sits as a boat onto a water tablet, and the water tablet changes about 1 meter. And so we said we'll have some wood that we can change over time without changing the rest of the structure. And that is what you basically see where below the lettering. And the water tablet rises and sinks according to that. And I also kept from quite good. I visited just 2 years ago, and it was all in mint condition, I would say. Next slide. It's a circular building made out of glulam prefabricated elements, which are just insulated. And it's a closed building. It's a dark building, merging with the lake, with the landscape. And it's part of a walk, so you can walk on top of it. I actually saw this building in Sweden when we designed it, and I asked when was it burnt, and I got the answer it was burnt in the 20s, 1927 to be precise. So that's a very, very sustainable way of making a wooden building maintenance free. Next slide. And then you have the charcoal surface when it's fresh. Next slide. The charcoal surface. Joakim, what do you think about the charcoal surface?
I think it works really well, and as you said, it's very beautiful and it ages very nicely.
Yeah. And next slide, we have in this part of Germany, it's a lot of larch words, so it's a very yellowish larch. Next slide. And that's the plan. it's also a science center, and it's also quite a bit of aquarium into it. Next slide.
Yeah. So you could say that the large is actually varnished. It's either burnt or varnished. So it's
Exactly.
nice.
Yeah. And
Combination
the lowland construction is all over large, which is common to that part of Germany. And I think when we started doing our projects in cross-laminated timber, it was quite a lot of from the Baltic states. Isn't that true?
Yes.
But now the construction firms in Sweden are picking up, and there are production lines. And I think there are 3 different places now in Sweden, or it's maybe 4.
Mm.
Next slide. You see how it sits on the water, and then there is a public promenade which is on top of the building. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Quite sensual. Another wooden building that we've done, we've covered in grass or straw. You take next slide. Also very, next slide, please. This is a observation area for bird watching. All wooden construction insulated, and on top of that, walls and the roof in this straw. Very traditional sign. Quite common in southern part of Sweden, also very common in the Baltic countries. Next slide. Next slide. And it's on the lake. This is a very shallow lake. It has the proportion of an A4 paper. It's the depth of the lake is at the most 2 meters. Quite often just about a half meter, which makes for herons like this one, just standing absolutely still and picking out the fish. Next slide. So what we needed to do was to raise the building about half a meter above the surrounding ground, and then you could see over the straws, and you could watch the birds. And this is not traditional, as you can see. It gets light from the top, whereas the straw is very vulnerable. Then it's covered with glass, and that allows for light to come into the building, and you have the view out of the lake and into the birds. Next slide. This is how you approach it, and the building is like a U-frame in order to shelter you from the northern winds. And then you have the straw, cut straw. Next slide. Next slide. And basically you could form that into whatever you want to do. And the straw is cut on the very site. And you have the main exhibition building. You have some furnaces and technical buildings. And then you have the long layout of a approaching ramp, which allows for disabled people to reach about 5 meters above ground in order to observe the birds. All wooden construction, as you can see, and covered with a straw. In winter time, summertime. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. And it's just a fairly steep roof section, and then the plan is irregular, and that creates the different heights of the walls. You can see the wooden construction. You can see the top glass, which covers the vulnerable edges of the straw, and you get these wooden spaces beneath, which are a bit like the wings of a bird when it shelters. It's a bit about the same triangular geometry as you can find in wings and so forth. Next slide. You want to comment on this, Joakim?
No, not really. It is also very nice, and it's a quite interesting way to actually take the material for the facade from the site itself. You in the winter time just cut down the straws, and then you in springtime place them on the facades.
It has an expected life of about 50 years, and yeah. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. And next slide. And then we have, this is Stockholm 2013, Aula Medica, which is a sort of irregular building around a big 1,000-person auditorium. And it tries to be a good neighbor, next slide, and sort of leans away from some of the buildings. And thus we needed to construct something to hold the glass. And that was done all in wood. This is wood taken from middle of Europe in Czech Republic, and it's cut in a mill and to a precision to just a few millimeters, and then it's assembled with this double inclined main wall facing onto the city and the main walkway through the site. And it's about 3,000 different glass panes making up this elevation, and about a third of those have individual measurements unique to each glass. And since there are about 3 members to carry each glass, there is 9,000 prefabricated wooden parts, and they all sort of fitted when they were put together on the site. Next slide. And as you can see in this and in a lot of our work, we allow some of the warmth of the wooden sort of inform the interior just with a hint of whitish hue on it. And there is also floor out of wood, which is leftover parts from parquet making. Next slide. And this elevation is about 1/3 see-through, and the rest is closed for insulation valleys. But the see-through glasses are evenly distributed along the perimeter in order to give a soft light to the inside. The next building is 2014, and it's called the Snow Trap, and it's up in the reindeer country part, the far north, and is a 90-kilometer cul-de-sac. And it's the Sami people, the nomadic people of the northern part of Sweden. It's on their ground. It was lent to the Swedish government for a period of time. And the aim of our structure was to sit very, very lightly on the ground. There should be as little as possible left of it. What you see in red on the left is the area of the biggest waterfall in all of Europe. It was made into a power plant in the early 20th century. Prior to that, it was one of the main tourist areas of Sweden. And this summer part of the land country is overlooking that site. And what you can see is a fair amount of wood and the forest, and that's pine forest. And in that pine forest, there is no wind. And basically the wind allows for the mosquitoes and the gnats to accommodate and eat on all the reindeer. And that means that the reindeers must come up above the tree level on the mountains in order to be able to survive in the summertime. Thus severe are the amount of insects in the northern part of Scandinavia. So our building, it was out of the main forest where there was some wind to be caught in the summertime. And that is also the area where it's easiest for all the reindeers to move. And all the reindeers, they have big horns to protect themselves. And thus a building sitting in the middle of those horns of thousands of animals moving had to be protected in some way, because the idea that we had was that the building should be constructed out of cloth in order to be sustainable, lightweight, and easy to take away. So we sort of covered this cloth with wood and did a wooden construction out of that in a sort of semicircular way, as the nomadic people quite often used to do. And inside of that building, there is a square atrium where you can always find the leeway. And it's a simple saddle roof, inclining, but it gets most of its impression of this self-supporting sort of fence of wood surrounding the cloth building, which is black behind it. And it can be closed down in the winter time, so you can open up in doors, as you can see. Next slide. The building is just situated easily on the pillars, and on top of that there is a glow lamp of character construction and an elevated platform, and on top of that there is lifted prefabricated walls built off site, and then you have the internal wooden beam structure, and on top of that you have the fabric building clad in fabric, and surrounding is really the snow trap protection. And we wanted the building to be able to trap some snow because everything is snowed in the winter. But if we can keep it in the atrium and in parts of the elevation, we can keep it for about 30 days or something, well into June. Next slide. How the building sits among the mountains. Next slide. Is about how it looks in plan. And I think that we perhaps should stop our presentation here. That it's what we could sum up is that we've been working. I think we're in Sweden. About half the housing is in units on the ground. One family living in a row house or a single family accommodation villa. There are about 2 million units like that in Sweden, out of the total of 4.8 million units. And basically all of those 2 million one family villas are done in wooden construction in balloon frame mode. So most of the Swedes are extremely familiar with how wood works. It is with the multi-story, the multi-apartment buildings that the concrete construction comes into play. And most of those flats, the 2.8 million flats, are in buildings lower than 6 stories, lower than 8 stories. And all of those could be fairly easily constructed into wood, which is the main purpose for our firm now, to prove that you could have a lot of housing done in wood, a lot of the construction in Sweden done in wood. And so we show you a bit of the tradition of how we've worked with wood over the last 40 years. And we started with some of our latest productions. And right now we have, I think, about 20 multi-story housing projects made out of wood. We have 2 cultural buildings made out of wood, and we have 3 big office buildings made out of wood. And I think the future for wood is excellent in Sweden, sustainable and reducing the carbon footprint. And Joakim, you want to say some final words?
No, I would just add that the future definitely belongs to wooden construction.
Thank you very much for your attention and your time. And you're absolutely marvelous at not looking bored, Tove.
I'm not bored at all, and I'm very happy. Thank you so much for this presentation. As I said in the beginning, Wingårdhs are precursor, and I don't know, maybe we can stop sharing the images, because then I can see you as well. Wingårdhs offers are precursor. You say that many of the smaller buildings in Sweden are built in wood, but you were one of the first offices also to build public buildings in wood, and many of your projects are larger buildings, and you've been an inspiration to so many on a national and also an international level. So thank you very much for this presentation. There's been a lot of questions in the chat, and we will continue to talk on the hop-in session. So the people that are on hop-in, you can go to on the left side of the stage, there is a space called session. If you join there, you can continue, put questions and talk to, I hope at least Joakim will ask us. I know that Gert has another